Right. This evening, I'm going to share a little bit about tolerance. Last week, we did some practices for peace. When we contemplate peace, it's really important to not be tricked and into thinking that peace is something that we accomplish out there by changing or fixing the problems that exist outside of us, right? But that actual peace comes from within. So the only awareness we need to work on is our own awareness. The only place where we actually can practice peace and make change is here inside our own minds. Remembering everything in the Bhagavad Gita, it teaches us everything we need to know for the yoga, about yoga. But the whole battle takes place in the field of our chakras. The field of Kurukshetra is the field of your own body, right? Everything that's going on in here and whatever is happening in here is reflected outward. So last night we were talking about the example often used in Vedanta of the snake in the rope. I'll repeat it quickly for those of you who haven't heard. You can be walking at night, if the conditions are, the lights are a little bit dull, and you look down and you see a snake on the ground. You become terrified. Your whole body reacts as if there's a snake, right? And you respond as if there's a snake because according to your conditions, you saw a snake. And then later, when the conditions are improved, the light comes up, you realize there was just a rope there. So we were talking last night about the difference between Brahman, the eternal, the supreme consciousness that is our true nature, the Atman, what we are remembering through the practices of yoga, through self-realization, and then the illusion, everything we perceive through these veils of Maya, right? This power, veiling power to let us have experience. The snake was not in the rope, right? The snake needed the rope to exist, but the rope itself was never in the snake because there never was a snake. This is important to remember when we go through life. Everything we see is what we're seeing is not really what's here. We're seeing according to the limitation of our senses, of our mind. We're perceiving things that aren't really here. And the way to purify our senses and purify our mind is compassion. There are other ways. Most of the times Dharma says the most important purifier is compassion. And then sometimes he says the most important purifier is pranayama. And I also find this funny when I'm reading the Yoga Sutras. It talks in the first chapter, verse 33. It's the Heart Sutras. It talks about all these qualities of the heart. Be happy for those who are happy, compassionate for the sad, joyful for the fortunate, and indifferent towards those you perceive to be wicked. That's one path. And then the very next verse says, or breathing exercises, right? So I feel like Dharma's got those two pieces when he says compassion, powerful purifier, or pranayama, because it deals with the prana, the life force energy, the energy behind everything, behind our mind, behind our imagination, our thoughts, our senses, everything that we're seeing. So I wanted to share, yesterday I had an experience of being exceptionally intolerant, and it was so helpful. I was tortured for a little while, and then I was like, oh, good, I have something to talk about tomorrow. So this is nice. But I went to sit on Monday mornings. I usually go to a little cafe around the corner from me. And it's the same regulars. It's usually every table is just one human quietly working. There's some classical music, and I go there to prepare the Bhagavad Gita session for the night. And I went yesterday morning, this beautiful morning. Was working, saw the same regulars. And then all of a sudden, two women came in talking so loudly, louder than you can imagine, right? And it was a job interview kind of chatter. So really selling themselves too. So loud, and only one conversation, no conversation to drown it out. And I found myself sitting there. I probably from the outside looked perfectly pleasant, just, a woman and her laptop and some books. screaming inside, wanting to say, shut up, right? There was one voice that wanted to say, be quiet. And then there was another voice that said, you could kindly go out over and ask if they could speak quietly. And then there was another voice that said, just watch, Sam. Watch how crazy you are right now. And then there was another voice laughing at all of it, right? So many, many characters were going on in here. And there were moments where I was like this, holding my head and breathing, like, this is not a big deal. You can get through this, right? But what happens? The senses, everything gets so wired up. And I saw the man who was sitting across from me, he was having some physical struggles with it as well. And then finally put his AirPods in. And I had just taken mine out of my bag before I walked there. So I was like, there's no escape. The only escape would have been to leave. And I knew, don't leave, stay, stay and see this differently. So I let myself be crazy for a few minutes because I think it's important when you are feeling that crazy to allow the craziness to be acknowledged, right? Sometimes if we get too yogic too quickly, we just kind of suppress it and hold it in our body and pretend I'm not irritated, I'm not annoyed, right? I'm like, okay, yes, there's irritation here, right? There's desires here. There's craving for this to be a quiet place. There's wanting things to be different than they are, right? They're wanting this to be quiet. There are all of this argument with reality. I'm completely at war in this moment with what is actually presented, right? How things are. So after I allowed myself to be crazy for a bit, then I said, okay, now do some work. And then I decided to do some self-compassion because obviously there are times when I have been the loudest human in a coffee shop. And I took a moment to sit in that. You've been the loudest one in a coffee shop. You've expressed through the same energy the same way. And then I sat and thought, okay, what was alive in you when that was happening, right? And sometimes I'm like, oh, a sense of insecurity, of maybe not being good enough or not, just kind of touching into what was going on. So I did a little bit of work diving into kind of meditating into that version, right? That expression myself, what's in there, what's alive in there. And then after I had identified some pieces, I practiced self-compassion. So I sat with that version, that sometimes expression of me, and then offered it kindness. And I'm so sorry that you had those thoughts. Those aren't true. That's not who anyone is, right? Just took a few moments to offer some kind words and some compassion. And this is part of being human. This is okay. After not very long, just even a couple moments of this practice, I started naturally feeling compassion for these two women. It just flowed out. And then it was fine. As soon as I felt this energy moving through, there was compassion for them, it suddenly got quieter. I didn't even really hear them anymore. I could do my work. My senses weren't so there, right? There was a reason my senses were so there, because there was something for me to see, to notice, to heal. So I want to talk a little bit about self-compassion. I often talk about self-compassion, but we know sometimes it's easier to practice compassion for other people than it is for ourselves. And that is the case when the other people are the ones that we really love, right? If it's like a child or a really close friend, or the ones that it's kind of easier for us to love, then it's easier to have compassion for them than for ourselves, right? In those situations, we need to learn to treat ourselves the same way that we treat them. So as we may say to them, oh, it's okay, everyone makes mistakes, this is part of life, you'll do fine. When we need to say that to ourselves as well, instead of you should be better by now, what's wrong with you, you've been doing this forever. And what helps us be able to practice this attitude towards ourselves is remembering that everything is unfolding perfectly. We're doing the best we can according to our conditions, right? And our conditions will keep evolving us and helping us to realize and see and change things. So there's an aspect there, practicing self-compassion in here. Sometimes it's hard to practice compassion for the beings that we see outside. And that is the case when there are beings that we consider strangers, right? Or people that we don't like, or that we really see as other than us. And in reality, there is no other, right? Everyone is just mirroring back different aspects of who we are. But we know we are none of the labels. So anything that you say after I am, the next word is a lie, right? If you say I am peaceful, you probably can only say sometimes. I am violent sometimes. I am kind sometimes. I am petty sometimes. I am generous sometimes. I am selfish. Do you understand? All these qualities, we are not all these qualities. We are I am. Who we really are is existence all the time. The qualities are impermanent. They're moving through. But when we identify with this ourselves with these qualities, we limit ourselves. And we know that this causes suffering to believe in separation, isolation, limitation. So whenever we see someone outside of ourselves that we really don't like, or don't like their action, or really judging, it's an opportunity to realize there is a quality inside me that I am not willing to see with compassion, that I think is unworthy of love, that I would rather suppress or hide, than I may feel some shame over. And the way to heal this quality is to actually offer it self-compassion and to acknowledge it. I was reading last night, we were studying chapter 9 of the Gita, and one of my favorite verses in there, 9:24, I believe, at the end. But it's basically when the divine Krishna is saying that all beings are the same in his eyes, sharing this equality. Everyone is exactly the same. And like the sun, he offers the sun to everyone. And it's up to us whether we turn towards it or not. And where is it? It's right here. It's not even very far away. It's closer to us than breathing, right? It's closer to us than moving our fingers. It's what's with us when we're quiet and still. So all that is the nature of unconditional love, closer to us than all these ideas in our mind. All the ideas in our mind, the labels, the qualities that we try to get value through, this is conditional love or attachment. I'm good if I do this. I'm valuable if I do this. This is right. This is wrong, right? That is when the ego thinks that it is the one that knows the best way for nature to unfold, that it should be intervening in some way to fix it. The divine has a perfect plan. Dharma says, be careful when you're criticizing or complaining about how things are unfolding. You're criticizing the divine, really, if you think about it. And not a single blade of grass grows without the will of the divine. So all the actions are happening, unfolding perfectly for the purification of the mind and the senses. We can't understand from this level because our senses are so gross. It's like if you're in the basement, of an apartment building and you're trying to understand what the city looks like, right? So in order to get out of the basement, we need to move up a couple levels, maybe one day get up to the penthouse. How do we get up to the penthouse? Compassion or pranayama, right? Our consciousness elevates. Suddenly we have a different perspective. We're able to see things from a different level. But right now we're seeing things down in the weeds, in the form, thinking we are the form itself. So when there is something outside of you that you can't tolerate, it is showing us, judge not lest ye be judged. Whenever we're judging something outside of ourselves, it's showing us there's something about me that I judge. There's something about me that I think isn't worthy of love, that I think I couldn't show this to the divine. It wouldn't accept this. And it says over and over and over again, especially in chapter 9, however you come to me, I accept you. There's no bias. There are none hateful and there are none dear to the divine. That's contrary to what the ego thinks. The ego is trying to be one of the dear ones, right? Well, I'm one of the good people. God likes me. And all those out there, no, they're bad. I'm going to save the world. None hateful, none dear. Loves all of them. When we really understand this, then we can finally have the courage to go in and pick up the unlovable pieces in here and purify them by seeing them, by holding them. In Alistair Shear's translation of the Yoga Sutras, it says ahimsa is experiencing every moment with a loving openness, right? A state of living free from fear, this loving openness. So what happened in the cafe? I didn't have a loving openness, right? I also noticed quite quickly, part of my agitation was my mind had the thought, I need to get this ready. I need to finish my work. And then that made me laugh because I know finishing my work isn't why I'm alive. None of us are alive to finish our work, whatever we think our jobs are, to build this or build this or this. We're all in these bodies to realize who we are and to learn what love is. And it's so funny how that attachment to, I need to get my work done. Maybe if I was even more attached to that, I would have stormed out of the loud cafe and missed the lesson, right? That's why I have to do my work and they ruined it, blaming the others, right? Oh, they ruined my peace. The only one who can ruin your peace is you, right? We ruin our own peace through avidya, through wrong understanding. Even when things are exceptionally challenging, if you go moment by moment without a window of time, without predicting anything that's going to happen a second in the future or anything that happened a second in the past, if you're just right here, breathing here, the next moment, breathing here, no problem. The next moment, breathing here. Maybe something happens, right? Maybe I was flying today. Maybe the plane crashed. The next moment, maybe breathing somewhere else or floating in an astral body here, right? Waiting for my next body here, in a new body here, in a new family here, just like that, just going and going and going. So when we really understand that self is, that who we are is free from harm, it never ends. It's eternal, right? The Gita says water can't wet it, fire can't burn it, wind can't dry it. Our essential nature is eternal. But when we start to suffer is when we identify with our meaty nature, which is, this is not us. Anything you can see is not you, right? It's an object. Part of brahmacharya, one of the yamas, is non-objectification, not objectifying others. We objectify ourselves when we identify ourselves as these objects. Our thoughts are objects. We see them, they're objects. Our emotions are objects. We can see them. We are the subject, right? Our feelings, all of that, objects, objects, objects. So how can we see these objects and not judge them? Have the courage not to judge the object. I judged the objects yesterday because I was afraid, right? Ahimsa, a state of living free from fear. I was afraid I wasn't going to finish what I needed to do. So there was an idea that that moment was supposed to be different than it was. Instead of accepting, okay, this is here. What I needed to finish got finished, right? It usually does. There's also a part of, we talk about in self-compassion work, that the mind, instead of being mindful with what's arising, it tends to over dramatize, create wild stories. This is happening. And then this, because of this, this will never happen. And this, and it'll go and imagining the worst case scenario. Do you ever do this? Something tiny happens and you start imagining, and then this will happen, this happened, this happened, this happened. And then I'll never, whatever it may be, I'll never work again, right? I'll never, whatever it may be. And this, I think, is why Dharma tells us, imagine the very best. We have this faculty of imagination, so start using it for the best. Notice when that's happening. Be mindful with what's coming up in that moment. Don't over dramatize it. And then you can be present with it. And then you have the opportunity to turn it into peace. It may seem so trivial, but those little things, making peace with the tiniest little thing, is huge. It's the same kind of anger, the same, if I stayed in my crazy mind with those women much longer, I could have started plotting their demise, right? The mind is very crazy. Don't worry, I don't think I would in this body, but Dharma says in the past, we've done terrible things you can't imagine, right? Coming through. But the mind is tricky. I actually have, many of you have heard this story lots of times, but one of the years that I was at the ashram, I always would have such wild dreams there. And I was having these terrible dreams about people doing horrible things to like my family members and my loved ones. And I was so filled with anger. And I had the realization that under the right circumstances, enough anger could arise in me for me to do very terrible, horrible things. And I went to one of the swamis one day and I said, Swamiji, may I talk to you? And I said, I'm worried I might be a psychopath. And he said, don't worry. If you're a psychopath, you probably won't be worried about it. And I shared, I just have had this realization. I used to think I was a nice human. And now I can see under the right conditions, this mind could do horrible things. And he said, this is actually very good. This is part of it, to not be attached, to think, oh, I can only do good, I'm good. When you start to allow to see everything that's in there, right? The complexity of what the mind can present, and learn how to tame it and heal it and deal with it and stop believing it, right? Because when we can't see it, that software is running behind the scenes. And it's blaming others for our problems. And it's creating more and more stories, more and more, all of these ideas expand, expand, expand. What else? Forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't have to be a huge process. I think as I shift through my practice, it seems that forgiveness, the more we really understand what Brahman or the Supreme, the Atman, who we are is, the more we know about the nature of that, the simpler forgiveness is. So the God that I was raised to believe in was punishing, right? It was this God of unconditional love, but if you didn't meet its standards, it would throw you into a fiery hell for just forever, only forever, right? And if you were able to live up to what it wanted, then you would go to this heaven forever. I love when Dharma says heaven is like a vacation club. You can go there and get some merits from your work, but you don't want to stay there. A wise man wants to come back and share the way, right? So as your understanding of Brahman, of the self, evolves, and you realize, oh, it really is unconditional love. It's completely accepting. And Dharma says there's no anger on the part of God, because God is not affected by anything. It's just the human mind that's holding this anger. So just like we can see the snake in the rope, there's no snake there. All of the judgments, the anger, all of these things, it's made up in the mind. It's mental activity. It's not really there. The rope is unconditional love, pure acceptance. The more we reflect on this and understand this, then when we have a moment where we maybe missed our mark of what we were hoping to do, we know it's okay. God's okay with me. We trust, okay, this was the best according to my conditions in this moment. The next time I have this opportunity, I'd like to respond differently. But we trust. In this one, I responded this way. It's okay. It's over. I've heard Dharma before. Once I asked him last year, I was really struggling with forgiveness, and he really loud and close to the camera said, "The past is over." Right? Stop thinking about it. Let it go. Right? It's over. It's gone. You can't touch it. It's only you're only hallucinating if you think about it now. Right? It's just imagined. It's not there. This is the only moment that's here. Same with any ideas you have of what's happening 1 millisecond after this, you're hallucinating. It's in the future. Don't be there either. If you stay here in this moment and do your best to be embodied in compassion, then your practice keeps evolving. You don't have to think and plan too far. So forgiveness comes from this, right? Understanding what the self is, then suddenly we can bring the shadow aspects of ourself, the things that we thought we had to hide, we can bring them to the sun and say, this too, will you love this too? And the divine says, yeah, no problem, right? But what about this? Yes, that's fine. And this, I was so petty here. Yeah, you didn't know any better at the time. Now you do, right? Can keep bringing it. And then it doesn't bother you when you see it outside of yourself. You have compassion. Oh, yes, I remember. It doesn't feel, you know what it feels like. I remember how I felt when I was acting that way. It felt really unpleasant in the body. And the judgment can go. The end of violence, the end of intolerance is when judgment goes. Judgment is limiting anything to the labels that we give it, right? And also fighting with the present moment, thinking that this moment should be different than it is. Judgment. There's more little scratches on this notepad, but I think that's probably good. Are there any questions or comments? So I invite you, next time someone irks you, right? Most likely it will happen tomorrow or in the next 5 minutes, or, you should get a chance pretty soon if you're lucky. Go ahead and be crazy internally for a while, acknowledge that. And then see if you can find a time where you've behaved that same way and meditate, get in touch with that version of yourself and what that version of yourself needed, what it needed to hear, what it needed to know. If you can whisper that to it, so you can be like the great mother of that self. And then when you give it what it needs, then you might notice, oh, okay. It naturally goes out to them too. That flow of love can move through this vessel. Whatever we're not bringing, we make some little blockages here, so the love just can't flow quite as freely. And I hope for all of you, out of love, now, not out of insanity, that you meet someone minorly irritating very soon and you remember to practice. Right. All right, let's sit for a moment. Bring all your attention to the spiritual heart, very center of the chest. This is where Atman, the portion of Brahman, unconditional love, pure acceptance, complete freedom from judgment. This is what resides here. And imagine you are holding first your entire body lovingly from this space, holding all the parts of your nature with complete acceptance. And then holding all of creation with love. Imagine this field of vibration infinitely moving in all directions, holding everyone on the earth, all the stars, all the planets, all the beings that ever have or ever will be. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Be receptive to the divinity within you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So nice to see you.